You didn't? Stacy, is there any way you could send?
I put the link in the chat. If you go to the chat, there's a link.
Okay.
I don't know where the chat is.
All right. Can everyone see?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm so sorry. Can everyone see the actual presentation?
No.
No. Okay. I'm sorry. Something's going on with the recording. Give me just 1 minute. There we go. Can everyone see it now?
Yes.
Thank you for that, for bearing with me for this little hiccup. So, well, hi everybody. My name is Bill Hirsch. I'm the Capital Grants and Loans Administrator for the Maryland Historical Trust. I'm joined here today by Stacy Montgomery. She's the Capital Programs Administrator for Maryland Historical Trust. We want to thank everybody for showing up today for this year's fiscal year's 26 HP Capital Grant Program application workshop. That's a lot to say, so I'm just going to call it HP Cap for short. We've already conducted a few webinars here, and we discussed some general information about the program. So if you didn't get a chance to attend one of those webinars or workshops, I strongly recommend that you watch one of the pre-recorded FY26 general overview webinars. They're going to be on our YouTube channel. We're not going to go over everything that we discussed in those webinars here today. So please take a look at those after this if you haven't. A link to our webpage that contains slides from many of our presentations can be found at the bottom of this slide. In this workshop, we're going to briefly go over the basics of the program, then dive just a little bit deeper into what can make your application more competitive. So before we get started, if you guys can all please just mute yourselves, turn off your cameras. That's just really going to help with the internet connection. I'm also going to turn off my camera while I'm presenting, but feel free to add questions into the chat, and Stacy can try to answer them. But we're also going to have time for questions afterwards. So, just hold your questions as far as raising hands until then. But if you have something in the chat, we can definitely try to get to you. Okay. So just to go over some of the basics of the program and this year's grant round, the HP Cap program funds capital projects for historic properties with a focus on the protection, preservation, or restoration of the funded sites. It's a really competitive grant program since there's a limited allocation of only $1 million per year, and that's for the entire state. But that's actually a pretty sizable increase from the previous amount that we had, which was only $600,000 a year for the entire state. So we're happy to have that. Awardees are granted a maximum of $100,000, but projects well under that amount have definitely been funded before. We just have a suggested minimum amount of $10,000. So if your project needs less than that, reach out to me. We can try to talk about your project scope and budget. Anybody or any entity is eligible to apply for this grant, but unless you're applying as a nonprofit entity, you're going to be required to provide a one-to-one match for the amount of funds that you requested. That's either going to be a cash match, an in-kind donation, or it can be a combination of the two. If you're going to apply as a state agency, you're going to need to apply as a nonprofit organization in your application. We've recorded a webinar that goes into a lot more detail concerning the match requirement, and you can find all of our webinars on our YouTube channel, which is linked here below. I've also included a direct link in the slides here to the FY26 General Overview webinar below. The property you're seeking funding for has to be either listed or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. It can be either an individually listed or eligible resource, or a resource that contributes to a National Register district. It can also be a National Historic Landmark too. So, but local designations that you might be working in a historic district, they might not rise to the level of National Register eligibility. So if you're unsure if your property is eligible or not, please just reach out to us with the address of the property, a historic context of your property, and some really clear photographs. We can have our National Register specialists do a little bit of digging to determine if your property is eligible. For the project to be eligible for the grant, the work has to be associated with capital improvements only. That means the scope of work that you give us in your application has to be construction related. This grant can't fund broader studies like historic context, feasibility studies, master plans, or research for historic interpretation. However, nonprofits and local governments can apply for pre-development services that are going to directly lead to a capital project. Those are going to include documents and plans like engineering studies, historic building assessments, architectural drawings, and or bidding services, things like that. So if it's going to directly lead to a capital project, we can help fund that. Also, even if the project is eligible, the most competitive projects are going to focus on construction work to historic building elements of the building, not new construction or utility or mechanical upgrades. While those are definitely important, they're not going to score as highly as applications that are going to try to restore or rehabilitate historic features like roofs, foundations, historic trim, plaster, windows, and other elements of the building that are actually part of the historic fabric. Finally, the application round is going to close on March 16th at 11:59 p.m. We're not going to be working until midnight that day, so we really suggest that you try to submit that application well in advance of the closing date, just in case you run into like a technical issue that might prevent you from submitting your application. We might be able to help find out the issue and get the application submitted for review. So if that happens, give us a call the next day and let us know about it, and we'll try to get that pushed through. Oh, we got a few people trying to join here still. Give me just 1 second. Okay. The MHT webpage format is projected to change in early March. Yay. So I can't provide a visual showing the location of this year's application link I can provide a visual finally. So on here on the left, you're going to see 2 application links. There's one here for individuals and one here is for organization. Once you started an application, if you need to log back into it or complete it, or if you want to view an application that you've already submitted for last year's grant round, please use this grants portal link here on the right, which is going to be located on the main grant portal page too. If you attempt to log back into an existing application using the application link that you already started, you're going to begin an entirely new application. And so it is a little bit interesting to have this happen in the middle of our grant round. So if you are going to be applying after we think the beginning of March, we're going to be updating everybody and actually how to get to that, because we have no idea really right now what the web page is going to look like. So next, let's talk about some of the documents you're going to need when submitting your application. You can access those documents here by going to this guidelines and resources link, and that's going to bring you to almost everything you're going to need. All right, so navigating into that guidelines and resources page, you can locate the grant guidelines, which are going to go into a lot more detail about eligibility, the application submittal process, how to complete the application, how the application is going to be reviewed by the committee, additional information concerning timelines, budgets, and eligible expenses that we won't be going over here today. The same webpage also contains links to materials that you're going to use to submit your application. They're all shown here in this box. So please, include these copies of the budget spreadsheet, the property owner consent letter template, and a document that's going to help you get started on, well, you don't have to include that, but there is also a document that helps you get started on applying using our electronic system. There's also the DNR project information form if you're working on DNR lands. So things like that. It's going to have everything that you need to submit. You can also find slides for our previous webinar and a link to our YouTube channel that has recorded versions of the webinar, matching requirements presentation, and a lot of other useful videos. I really suggest watching some of these before getting started on your application. They're going to give you a lot more information, from past rounds and the way the easement program works, things like that. Again, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and we can go over any that you might have. So when thinking about how to get started and to make your application more competitive, it'll help you all to know just how the team is going to review the application. Focus your energy on the most important items or sections in the application. So can you describe the goals of the project and how they relate to the purpose of the HPCAP program? Can you make the historic preservation connection? This is very, very important. Is your organization's mission clear? And does the overall project provide a public benefit beyond the needs of yourself or your organization? What are the funds specifically going to be used to pay for, and how will the project be carried out? Why is your project important? Those are just a few questions that you're going to need to keep in mind when completing the application. Just remember, the clearer that you make the project to the reviewer, the more they have an understanding of it, the more competitive it's going to become. In addition to understanding how your application is going to be reviewed, it helps to make the application easier for the committee to review. Use clear and concise original language. Please don't just cut and paste sections from a different document. Make sure that all the sections are going to be filled out. Even if you don't have a lot of information to provide, It's just going to be helpful for the reviewer to see kind of the continuity of what you're working on. And ensure that all your information you want to give to the reviewers is in the appropriate section of the application. And don't leave any portion of those sections blank again. Add information to every section. Paying attention to the smaller details and formatting, that's going to help make your application look a little more professional and easier to review. But I do have a pro tip. This is a big one. If you have applied to the program in the past and you intend to apply again for the same project, please just don't submit your previous application. Think about the reasons that it might not have been funded and revise those applications so those reasons are addressed. If you submit the same application over and over again, it's not going to make you more or less competitive. While all sections of the application are really important and should be fully completed, there are a few sections that are going to be given a little bit more weight by the review committee, and those are the project description, significance and urgency, and the public benefit and impact sections. That's going to be where most of the meat of the review is going to take place. Be descriptive, concise, and clear in these sections, and it will help make it easier for the review committee to understand the overall breadth of your project. Let's go into the project description section first. Filling out this section, think about the specific project that you're applying for and how it's going to be completed. Make sure that the reviewers will be able to easily visualize your project so they can ensure that the project scope is going to be eligible and competitive. Avoid really broad descriptions and list only construction-related tasks, not the mission of your organization or the history of the site. Those are definitely important things, but there's a different place for that. So in this section, you really want to focus on what's being constructed. The construction project description and the grant project scope of work are going to be two different sections of the application. In the construction project description section, you're going to talk about the entirety of the project, even scope items that the grant funds won't be used for. So, if you're doing a full rehabilitation of a house, but you only need grant funding for the roof work, in the construction project description section, you're going to talk about how you're fully rehabilitating the house. Not just we're going to fix it, but this is what we're doing. We're meeting Secretary of the Interior standards, things like that. That's really going to help you. That's going to be a little bit different than the grant project scope of work section. So that's going to be more specifically about what the grant funding will actually pay for. So, we're only going to apply for the roof. So remember, the grant project scope of work is where we're going to put what we're requesting grant for, and the construction project description is where we're going to put the overall project that this is going to fall into. The more detailed you can be about the project, the fewer questions the reviewer is going to have about your project. So just honestly be as detailed as you can. So for instance, if the project funds are going to support the stabilization of the structure, list the steps that it's going to take to complete the project. Will the roof, foundation, and other structural members be repaired or replaced? Will masonry pointing and drainage improvements be a part of the stabilization project? You don't have to go into a lot of detail about how the steps are going to be carried out, but it's going to help the reviewers see that you have specific tasks in mind. Provide any estimates that you might have as an attachment, and make sure you discuss them in your construction project description and your grant project scope of work. Also, you should discuss exactly where on the structure or the site the work is going to take place. There might be restrictions on what portions of a building or site the grant can fund, particularly if you're going to apply for a religious site or a structure like that. If you're going to apply for work on a religious site, please reach out in advance of submitting the application and ensure that the project and the funds that you're requesting are going to actually be eligible for the work. Finally, the goal of the grant funding is to help preserve these buildings and sites, not just to address aesthetic or general maintenance issues. So think about the most critical items on your site, what's needed to prevent further degradation of the resources, and prioritize that. If you're applying to refinish the floor, paint siding, or recreate plaster ceiling medallions, and you have a hole in the roof of the building or your foundation is failing, the reviewers are going to note that the structural issues are a lot more pressing, and this section of the application might not score as highly. So make sure you look at those problem features in your building, not just what you want to look good. Here's another pro tip. Since this grant funding is meant to restore or preserve historic features, and because the work has to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, noting that the work will replace or repair the material with the same type of material that's also known as in-kind work That's going to go a long way in showing that you have an understanding of how the project can be accomplished while still meeting MHT's mission. So significance. This section of the application is also really heavily weighted. Significance refers to the significance of your site itself, not the overall project or your organization's mission. Again, those are very important things, but we're looking at what is the significance of the building itself. You're going to need to discuss the history of your site in detail and try to differentiate it from others that might be of the same type. Was the building of the site pivotal to a significant local or regional or national event? Is it the first of its type or a unique form of architecture? Have there been any changes to the site since it was first constructed? Is this the best example of a specific historical theme, such as early dairy practices in Maryland? Please keep in mind that the significance of a place often changes over time, sometimes above and beyond what made it important historically. So think about why your site is not only significant back in the past, but why it's also important today. You know, was a historic school building later used as a home base for important civil rights organizations? Does the community now use an old bank as a primary gathering or event space? Was an old train station later refurbished to be a commercial business or a government office that was important to the redevelopment of a town? So why is the site important to you today? Make sure you make that case as well. Paint us a picture. You know your site better than anybody. So make sure the case for why you make the case for why your property is unique. Another pro tip: we do not need your MIHP form or your NRHP nomination form, which if your property has previously been surveyed, we really all have access to. What's going to be helpful is information that you can provide that goes above and beyond what's in those documents. So if you have an MIHP or an NRHP form, please do not include that in your application. So urgency in the context of this application has two meanings. First, there's the urgency associated with stopping a structure from further degradation or preventing encroaching development. Is the poor condition of a site preventing it from being used? If you don't do anything now, what further damage is going to occur to the building, and how long will it take before you can't undo that damage? Clearly explain why the scope you're applying for is the most critical for your site, and tie that into the construction project to show how it will alleviate that issue. So, make sure that you're focusing on why it's urgent. Urgency of need is another form of urgency, but that refers to the financial ability of you or your organization to complete the project without intervention from this grant. Have you applied for other grant funding and been denied? Have you looked into other loans that you never received? Did fundraising efforts that you tried to do not provide enough information to complete the project? Discuss, what avenues of funding you've tried to exhaust before applying for this grant. While it's not necessary to discuss the urgency of need if you don't have one, so if we're just a small percentage of the overall project, if you have a phased project or you have other sources of funding going in, if you do have an urgency of need, it helps show the reviewers that MHT's intervention might be the only way that you get the issues addressed. One thing to keep in mind, if MHT funding will make up only a portion of the overall project, make sure that you include all other sources of funding that will go toward the overall project in the budget section of the application and the budget spreadsheet. This lets the reviewer know that the project might move forward more quickly, or that other state funds would be used, which can't be easily paired together to tackle the same project. We would hate for you to have $2 million on hand and ask for $100,000 and not tell us about the budget. And we're looking at a big project and we're saying, well, $100,000 isn't going to be a drop in the bucket with that. So let us know everything that you have going into the project. So public benefit is also a very heavily weighted section, and the one that's really kind of difficult to grasp for a lot of the applicants. Public benefit of your project refers to how the completed project will positively impact the general public and not just your constituents, your congregation, or your local patrons. While those groups are really important, the goal of the project is going to be allow others who have no understanding of your site to be educated about its history or to continue to use it as an active space. For that reason, although individuals and businesses are eligible to apply, and you might even have a really good project at a really important site, they just really aren't a great fit because the benefit of the project will relate to a much smaller group or for personal benefit. If you're applying as an individual business, that doesn't mean automatically that you won't be competitive, but you will need to clearly show that you have a plan in place to provide, that broader public benefit, which is going to be beyond your own needs. This doesn't mean friends or customers coming to your property or making the property more aesthetically pleasing to the community. It means providing some sort of like public programming around the history of your site. If the project is going to help accomplish a historical programming mission, if it's going to provide additional public accessibility, or maybe possibly create partnerships with other organizations, you could make those cases in this section in detail. Think about how visitors are going to engage with the site, what history is being conveyed, and how you're going to use that site in the future. Will a roofing project allow an organization to continue its mission by reoccupying the building? Will a restoration of a clock tower reactivate a physical touchstone for a community? Will repairing a barn allow now access for visitors to come in and get a sense of life of a 19th century tobacco farm? So elaborate on how the site is specifically going to be used to educate the public. Are you going to have interpretive markers that are installed that are going to detail the significance of the building? Our school class is going to visit your site and get an understanding of an earlier time. If your site's an event space, will a portion of it be set aside for historical education? You're going to have artifacts or documents or other relics that are going to actually be viewed by people visiting the site. Providing a really clear educational component to your project is going to help illustrate the impact that your projects will have on visitors, and how they're going to walk away with a better understanding of your historic site. Again, you don't have to be a museum to do these things, but the point is to think about, what am I doing to convey the history of this building to the overall public, not just making it better, which is why it's kind of hard for individuals and businesses, and then also having accessibility to that site. We often have applications that, effectively really spell out a project, its significance and its public benefit, but they're missing some of the documents we need to either have a better understanding of the project or that are required to, establish an applicant's eligibility. In the next couple slides, we're going to go over the most common documents that are either omitted or just not completed correctly. So photographs are probably the easiest way to show the significance of your property, its context, and any of the critical issues that the grant funding is going to help alleviate. So providing clear photographs lets the reviewer see exactly what the issues are and the severity of the damage that is going to need to be fixed. It also might show the importance of a historic feature that's going to need to be restored. At least one of the photographs should be a context photo. That photo shows the entirety of the building or site, and it's not just where the work is going to take place. We really want to get a sense of the overall site, why it's either architecturally significant or just showing its historic setting. If you're going to be selected for an award, this is the photo that MHT is going to use in our outreach materials. So make sure that the building is in focus, not skewed and free of obstructions, and then it shows the overall site, not just what we're focusing on. You're going to need to provide additional photos of the area of work that's in the same area that's described in your grant project scope of work. If you're applying for roof repairs, please don't include other areas of site that might need work, such as flaking paint in your siding, since that's just going to confuse the review team who might have some questions about the accuracy of your grant project scope of work. The photos where the area where the work is going to take place should be clear and should capture enough of the issue so that the reviewers make an informed decision as to the severity of the problem. A really good example is this set of photos from the Jane Gates house in Cumberland. The photo on the left is a context, or the top, I'm sorry, is a context shot that shows the overall building and its important character defining features, how it's set into the scene. The next shot really clearly shows the location of the damage in the porch that was going to be addressed with this grant. You're going to need to provide at least 10 photographs as an attachment to your application, and we've developed a photograph template that can be found on our webpage. All you're going to need to do is click the blank box in the template, and the program will automatically let you, select a photograph from your files, and then it will format that to go in there. So it's really, really nice. Pro tip, please take very clear photographs of the most critical areas and provide captions so the reviewers kind of know what they're looking at. A lot of times we get these applications in and it's just a shot. We have no idea what the damage is. We don't even know what part of the building is. So please put captions under these photos to let us know what we're actually looking at. So we have just a shot of a wall with no description. That might lead the reviewer to understand that the masonry is in need of repointing. We have no idea. So just let us know. If you're a business or a nonprofit applicant, you're going to need to provide a series of organizational documents. MHT is going to need a copy of your IRS determination letter or an umbrella letter if you're part of a larger organization, a full copy of your articles of incorporation, a full copy of your bylaws, and proof that your organization is registered with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. They're also known as SDAT. You're also going to need to show that you're in good standing with SDAT. That's really important. You're not going to be considered for a grant if you're applying as a nonprofit or business if you don't supply these documents. So make sure that you have that good standing. If you're not registered and good standing with SDAT, you can apply right now. And once they receive your application fee, they will give you a letter of temporary status. And that's going to be fine for MHT's purposes. So just because you're not set up yet doesn't mean you can't. They're pretty quick about getting you that letter. So I would, if you're not set up yet, get started on that right now. And we can use that temporary standing for our purposes. So a couple more pro tips. Please upload full copies of the organizational documents, not just snippets or certain pages. MHT, we review these documents for a lot of different information, and if there's pages left out, it could hinder your ability to receive a grant because we might have questions about some of the information there. So make sure that you give us the full documents of everything that you're going to supply. All applicants also have to provide a property owner consent letter, and the letter states that the owner of the property is aware of the project and supports the project for which all grant funds are going to be used. It also stipulates that the owner of the property agrees to the conveyance of a preservation easement or agreement to MHT. If you aren't familiar with easements yet, they are a deed restriction. They're going to protect your site or building from inappropriate alterations or degradation just due to lack of maintenance. Basically, the easement acts sort of like a miniature historic district, but just for your building. And MHT is going to have to review all work that takes place to an area of a building or site that is covered by the easement, regardless of how the project is being funded. So once an easement is in place, the easement is there for a life of a term. Even if you're not using grant funding going forward, you will be required to get an easement approval before any work to your building that's covered by the easement. We're not going to go over all the specifics of an easement in this presentation, but MHT has a presentation for easements on our YouTube channel if you'd like some additional information. Just know that the conveyance of an easement is a requirement for all awardees of this program. There is no waiver. It does not matter if you already have an easement or not. If you don't want an easement, you still have to do the easement. Make sure that everybody in your organization that has a responsibility for this building and this grant is on board with the easement conveyance process before you apply. So if you're a local government, make sure that your county officials are okay with this. If you're a nonprofit board, make sure the board members are okay with this. The owner has to be the person that conveys the easement. The other part of that too is that easements take some time to convey, well over a year. So just know you're not going to get grant funding immediately if you are awarded grant funding and you're required to convey an easement. It might take over a year for that to happen, and funding can't be dispersed until that easement's conveyed. So just keep that in mind moving forward. You're also going to be able to provide letters of support to attach to your application. The letter of support needs to be drafted by someone who's familiar with your site and understands the positive effect the project's going to have on the site's preservation. The letters can be from congregants or patrons, ancestors of people who are historically associated with the site, community leaders, other nonprofits that might have an interest in the site's preservation, local, state, or national legislators. Basically, anyone can give you that letter of support, but the letter should show that the signer is aware of the significance of the site and specifically calls out the scope of work listed in your application. It has to be signed by the person who drafted it. It won't be included in the application if it's not. So when we mean signature, we mean not an email signature, actual signature needs to be signed. Finally, if you're applying for the funding for the exact same scope of work that you applied for in the past, either through an MHT grant or any other grant, you can use that letter of support from an earlier or different grant request, just so long as it's for the exact same scope of work that's listed in your application. But the caveat here is going to be that it's only good for up to 1 year. So if you applied for something 3 years ago and you have a letter of support, we're not going to be able to take that. But if you applied last year for a different grant round, but it's the exact same scope of work, we can still take that letter for the letter of support. So these are just a few of the things to look out for when you're going to develop your application, but I really suggest you read the grant guidelines and review all the other information on our HPCAP webpage. Since we didn't go into everything here today, I'm going to include my contact information here below. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We can go over your application in a little bit more detail. Please note, we can't help write your application for you, but we can definitely let you know if you're missing anything or if you're on the right track with a scope or a public benefit. Also, please note that we are going to be doing a threshold review. So if some of these documents, especially this last section I talked about, are missing or just unclear, we are going to be reaching out to you to get clarification. We're going to be reaching out for clarification on scopes and things like that. So don't worry, not all is lost. Once you submit your application, we will be going back and forth to make sure that we get it to a position that it can be put in front of the committee. So going to open up the floor for questions, and we're going to go back and forth. So if anybody had questions in the chat or want to raise their hands here, I'm happy to answer them. They can be specific to your project. Jennifer, yes, please go right ahead.
Hi, thanks, Bill. I am joining you very late because I could not locate the link this morning in my email. Thank you so much for this webinar. I'm wondering, will you have this recorded and up on the website?
It actually is being recorded right now, and I'm actually going to stop
Wonderful.
recording the questions. So let me do that right now. Give me 1 second here. All right.